thank you very much, and thank you all for being here. I'm tremendously excited to have such a great group of papers and such a great possibility for conversation. As Joseph said, my name is Ben Homan from Solvay Regina University in Newport, Rhode Island, and I'm currently serving as the area coordinator for the Ecological Culture or Integral Ecology section of the International Institute for Method and Theology. I want to thank Ryan Duns and Joseph Ogbanaya and the larger Marquette community for supporting our group and hosting this meeting, and for supporting some of our other initiatives as well. I also want to thank all of you for being here and for being part of this important conversation on the 10-year anniversary of Laudato Si. As we celebrate this anniversary of this profound and prophetic restatement of Catholic social teaching, I wish that there was, in fact, more to celebrate. I wish that there was more evidence that human beings collectively had heard the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor that lies at the heart of Francis's call for a profound transformation of our relationship with our common home. I wish that there was more evidence that we were living into the cycle of progress rather than decline in relation to these challenges. But as the Pope himself has acknowledged in Laudate Deum and elsewhere, progress has been slow, even to slow the advance of environmental decline. As I'm sure you know, the human response to multiple dimensions of the contemporary ecological crisis has been badly inadequate, and we're only just beginning to experience the more radical effects on our common home. We are witnessing an ongoing and dangerous decline across the world's ecosystems, fueled by an unprecedented rise in species extinction rates. By some measures, we're on track for as much as a 75% reduction in species biodiversity in just a few centuries if we remain on our current trajectory. According to the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, of the 9 key systems and processes that contribute to stable, healthy life on Earth for all organisms, we have already crossed the threshold for proper and sustainable functioning for 7. While increased conservation efforts can help to address this, there's a profound need for a more sustainable means of production and, unavoidably, more sustainable habits of consumption, especially in the so-called developed world. While some social commentators blame higher birth rates in poorer nations and the consequent boom in global human populations, it remains the case that the richest 10% of persons in this country are responsible for 50% of total carbon emissions, while the poorest 50% of persons on the planet are responsible for only about 8%. My hope is that in and through our conversations this weekend, we can encourage a cycle of progress in relation to these challenges. My hope is that we can contribute to the multiple vectors of ecological conversion still so badly needed in our world today: intellectual, moral, religious, and psychic. And my prayer is that God will act decisively in and through all of us to bring about a much-needed redemption of ourselves, our communities, and our world. I am excited to share this opportunity to learn from so many friends and colleagues who seek to help us better understand the challenges we face, to draw our attention to the important work already being done in the world, in different communities and by different peoples, and to both encourage and challenge us to greater personal discernment and social action in relation to these challenges. Without further ado then, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. We have Dr. Richard Miller, a professor of philosophical and systematic theology at Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska. His presentation today is titled "The Pursuit of Truth and Justice in Planetary Emergency: Reflections on Laudato Si and the Dynamics of the Techno-Economic Paradigm." Please join me in welcoming Dr. Miller this morning.
Well, thank you, Ben and Ryan and Joseph and everyone who's come here from far, and everybody who's organized this. I've organized some conferences, and it's a hell of a lot of work, so I really appreciate it, and I appreciate the invite. Years ago, almost 30 years ago, when I was in Boston College, my class was a year-long class with Pat Byrne, who's happy to see today, on insight, and I traveled with a friend to we were in London, and we went to see the Thomist Herbert McCabe, and I was very impressed by Lonergan's insight. So I asked Herbert McCabe, Thomist, have you ever engaged insight? And he said that, well, he went once to a bookstore and he saw this massive book called Insight, and he opened it up and he pulled it open and he saw "In the 31st Place." He looked around, and he slid it back in, and he headed off to the pub. I appreciate it in the 31st place. I think Lonergan, the Thomist adage is to distinguish in order not to, distinguish in order to unify without confusion. And I thought Lonergan was brilliant in doing that. My background is I work in, well, it's a few things, but I'm not on the Lonergan track. I'm not spending my time in these texts. But I was very much with Karl Rahner. I know Rahner quite well, and the existential Thomism reading of Aquinas. So there's many affinities with Lonergan. They're both coming out of Rahner. So I'm going to put some ideas here, and I would appreciate these further in the 22nd, 31st place of Lonergan, because I think Lonergan could help me, and this will help me as we produce these papers for a volume. My great question has been the question of human suffering, the reality of God, whether we really can say God's a loving God with the horrors of history. And I working in Aquinas and Thomas on the question of mystery of God and human suffering. And 2007, longer story, but I got involved in looking at the climate problem, and since that time have been very, very engaged, both publishing and in activism. And so this talk really is activism at many levels, at all sorts of university, protests in the White House under the Obama administration with a group of people, with the Patriarch Bartholomew, with Vatican, all sorts of, and this talk is really coming out of a problem that I have experienced that surprised me along the way. So let me find the date here. I do this now with my dates, so it's to give us a sense of the long effects of our actions. So Ben was talking about we're in a mass extinction event. Mass extinctions are 5 to 10 million years for biodiversity to return. So I think we need to start broadening our imagination. Human beings, we should live about 300 million years before the sun kicks up enough heat as it moves to a red giant. Will wipe us out, and then we'll reverse the process of evolution in terms of species. But we should have a long run, and I want to draw our attention to that. Too often in these discussions, very clearly, I wrote a paper on this deep responsibility for the deep future. The only thing that seems to be in our horizon is one lifetime. It's actually said in the scientific literature because of the computations, computer computations, and the expense of doing that, of the models, and that's the one, and because human beings can only imagine one lifetime. They can only imagine regarding their kids. So things we're doing now are going to have great effects way into the deep future. So that's the date. That's the explanation of the date. So my outline here is Laudato Si in the techno-economic paradigm. What are we talking about? This becomes the big problem, I think, which would be very helpful, I think, with what Lonergan's work. We keep losing our subject matter. There's a way in which we can't talk about this. So Lonergan's lines, be attentive, be intelligent, be responsible, be reasonable, be responsible. We're not doing any of those, really. And it's the nature of the subject matter, the overwhelming character of the subject matter, that creates conditions for us to fail in that regard. And so what I'd like to get to is, at the end there, I want to get to a possible response, which I think in my reading, going back and looking at Insight after all these years, is the absolute supernatural solution in the last part of Insight. The higher integration would be how I would understand this fitting into Lonergan's framework. And in my reading through it, I would go more, I read through, for instance, John of the Cross as helpful in this regard to deal with the overwhelming character of this problem. So This experience of overwhelm and the dynamic of existential risk, there I'll go through some sociological work. And then how to respond to this. What's how do we break this kind of negative dynamic? All right, so I want to do, first want to do the, get Laudato Si and kind of orientate us with regards to Laudato Si. This is the kind of important paragraph in Laudato Si. There's a tendency to believe that every increase in power means an increase of progress itself, an advance in security, usefulness, welfare, and vigor, an assimilation of new values into the stream of culture, as if reality, goodness, and truth automatically flow from technological and economic power as such. That's what he means by the technocratic paradigm. And he repeated that in Laudato Deum in the most recent one. The fact is that contemporary human beings have not been trained to use power well, because our immense technological development has not been accompanied by a development in human responsibility, values, and conscience. Each age tends to have only a meager awareness of its own limitations. It is possible that we do not grasp the gravity of the challenge now before us. I think it's quite clear that we don't grasp that. And this, not grasping this, is of the highest importance for what it means for the poor of the world. I mean, for everybody, actually. The risk is growing day by day that human beings will not use their power as they should. In effect, power is never considered in terms of the responsibility of choice, which is inherent in freedom, since its only norms are taken from alleged necessity, from either utility or security. But human beings are not completely autonomous. Our freedom fades when it is handed over to the blind forces of the unconscious, of immediate needs, of self-interest, and of violence. In this sense, we stand naked and exposed in the face of our ever-increasing power, lacking the wherewithal to control it. We have certain superficial mechanisms, but we cannot claim to have a sound ethics, a culture and spirituality generally capable of setting limits and teaching clear-minded self-restraint. What I want to kind of deal with is this being naked and exposed in the face of this ever-increasing power, this experience of overwhelm, and how it distorts our sense of being attentive, intelligent, reasonable, and responsible. The establishment of a legal framework which can set clear boundaries and ensure the protection of ecosystems has become indispensable. Right? This isn't going to be done by just individuals doing their thing. That's the great lie. I mean, the carbon footprint, who pushed the carbon footprint on the world? Was developed by some scientists. British Petroleum. They're all for your carbon footprint. Go ahead, try. Our food systems, everything's saturated in oil. Okay, otherwise, so the establishment of a legal framework which can set clear boundaries and ensure the protection of ecosystems has become indispensable. Otherwise, the new power structures based on the techno-economic paradigm may overwhelm not only our politics, but also freedom and justice. And I would put in parentheses there that truth, freedom, and justice. Truth is the beginning of the capacity for freedom and justice. And it's overwhelming, again, our capacity. And then we constantly lose our subject matter. Ben said a bit about the planetary boundaries. I'm going to talk about some of the Earth system changes. I'm going to try to do this in 15 minutes to give us a sense. I mean, you really have to know what's going on. I've spent a great deal of time on the science because I felt like we weren't actually talking about the subject matter when I was dealing with these things academically and theology, etc. So Earth system changes, the deep future, rapid climate change, which is happening right now, and then what's kind of shockingly abrupt climate change, which is, I'll explain. And that this ultimately means that climate change is morphing into an existential threat. So the 9 planetary boundaries, Ben mentioned this. This is a framework from 2009. It's been kind of the guiding framework in the scientific community. What's the safe operating space for humanity? It doesn't mean that it's irretrievable, that if we go past these boundaries, it's over, or any of these kind of things. It means that we're now outside what we can see as safe operating boundaries. In 2009, so in the beginning, 7 boundaries assessed, 3 were crossed. In 2015, 7 boundaries were assessed, 4 were crossed. 2023, 9 boundaries assessed, 6 crossed. And Ben, did you have 2024 saying there's 7?
2024, September 2024, we're right at the verge of crossing into the 7th. I think we have crossed it. But.
Okay. So, and then to know who we are here in the United States, we're the largest emitter historically. So this is, I haven't found a better graph. So this is, so for instance, the United States, we talk all about, oh, we're not doing anything unless India or China, all these lies we've just been told over and over again. But even, we're still over 20% of historical emissions. China, this has risen, so they're cumulative emissions. This has risen, I think China now, historical emissions is about 13%. Okay? China is the leading emitter in the world now. What else about us? Well, we are the world's leading oil producer with 20% of global oil production. If you can see this, I couldn't get a great image. Look at the great explosion. When did that happen? That happened in 2016. It starts in 2009. And that's in the Obama administration and Democratic Congress allowing for this to be exported. This is not to false equivalency as to the Republican Party. It's just to let us know what's been going on. And natural gas production. We produce 25% of the world's natural gas. We produce 20% of all the world's fossil fuels here. Deep future impacts. Speed kills. So Ben was talking about the loss of biodiversity. The faster the change, the more difficulty species can adapt. And the climate is now changing faster than it has during any other time in 65 million years, 100 times faster than the Paleo-Eocene extinction event 56 million years ago. One of those destructions is the coral reefs. So the idea in the IPCC is 1.5 degrees Celsius, we lose 70 to 90% loss of corals. The new 2022 study is we're going to lose 99% of the world's coral reefs. And we are already at 1.5 degrees Celsius. And it's accelerating. Our warming's accelerating. I mean, this is somewhat debated, but Jim Hansen was arguing this, but from what I can tell, more and more people are seeing this, that as we put pollution in the atmosphere, it creates aerosol pollution. That pollution reflects energy back out to space. As we reduce our pollution, we get the true warming. And that true warming could be another 1.2 degrees Celsius. So what's happened is in 2016, I believe, if my memory serves me well, the International Maritime Association put in restrictions on sulfate, very polluting fuels. So you had ships crossing the oceans and they're polluting very badly. Now you're going to have cleaner fuels because those really terrible pollutions were killing 6 million people a year, fossil fuels, globally. So you reduce that, and then what's happening is the idea is that you're accelerating such that we could be at 2 degrees Celsius of warming, Hansen argues, and others are arguing, by 2039. So the coral reefs. So coral reefs, you're going to bleach the coral reefs because it's warming of the ocean, because this is, coral reefs can recover after bleaching, but they can't recover when you have, I think the Great Barrier Reef is 4 bleachings since the past 10 years or something like that. They can't recover. And so those reefs, if we actually keep doing what we're doing, if we reach in the 600 parts per million CO2, those reefs will be destroyed, and then you'll lock in that destruction because you acidify the oceans. And that destruction, if we look at the great mass extinctions, the recovery of reefs took 5 million years. So that's what we're doing. How long does CO2 last in the atmosphere? 50% of the CO2 released today will be absorbed by land vegetation in the oceans, 25% will last 1,000 years. An additional 12% is 10,000 years. An additional 7% is at least 100,000 years. So the mean lifetime of CO2 in the atmosphere is 30 to 35,000 years. So you hear it kind of, CO2 lasts a long time, CO2 lasts a couple hundred years. No, CO2 lasts, David Archer's and others, it's 30 to 35,000 years. Once we get the temperatures going, they don't drop for 1,000 years. So we'd have to have a stop emissions, massive reforestation, pull maybe 200 billion tons of carbon out of the atmosphere. It's about 1.2 trillion trees to pull out 160 billion tons of carbon. We have to do that to draw temperatures down. Otherwise, we're set for, you don't see a diminishment according to models for another 800 years. You don't see anything. Okay. Once you heat up the oceans, they don't cool down. Sea level rise and displacement. So now we're getting more of the human effect. With regards to coral reefs and the human effect, coral reefs are the 25% of the ocean's biodiversity is in coral reefs. The productivity of the ocean is driven by coral reefs. 500 million to 1 billion people, their primary protein source is from coral reefs. So that's not just this destruction of something, it has huge consequences for the poor of the world. Sea level rise and displacement. So here's the kind of chart I use on sea level rise to give, when I teach this, students a sense of the different range of possibilities. Usually you get the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. I think this is one of the problems. I think the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is one of the great achievements in human history in its coordination. Thousands of scientists across time in this effort. The summary for policymakers has to be approved by the governments of the world, including the United States and Saudi Arabia, etc. That gets, is it distorted? Well, there's been some articles distorted, but I don't want to overstate that. It's certainly, the implications are softened. Then that comes to the press, and then the press says, oh, these scientists are exaggerating. Well, IPCC sea level rise for this century is around 1 meter, 3.3 feet. I'm giving you just some range. Ramsdorff would be 2 meters. NOAA, quite shockingly, we could have 10 to 12 feet by the end of the century. Jim Hansen argues we could have 16 feet by the end of the century, 4 feet by 2065. And that'll be really important, that number. So 4 feet by 2065. Richard Alley, not in published work, these are all published in a lecture, argues that it's possible for 20 feet. I think that's probably a stretch. But what's kind of shocking in all these is NOAA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Association, which is being defunded now, they are very careful not to overstate. They're going to be very conservative in their numbers, and they maintain that that's possible this century. Eric Rignon, one of the most important glaciologists in the world, 4 feet, 2/3. So this is, just to put this in context, Laudato Si is published in 2015, the May of 2015. Great encyclical. Arguably, Bill McKibben argues, one of the great environmentalists, that the most important ethical document on environment. Late. Too damn late. The church is too late. Eric Rignon writes at that time, he publishes, we're committed to 4 feet, 2/3 chance of 10 to 16 feet from the West Atlantic ice sheet. That's right at the same time, May of 2015. So the church comes out with this, and we're already talking about the 2/3 chance of the West Atlantic ice sheet losing it, and committed to 4 feet. So we have to keep that in mind. Can't be too late. Have to be ahead. Have to be a sense of the risks. Anders Leverman and others, the basic view now is that we're going to lose the West Atlantic ice sheet. 16 feet we're committed to, and now it's just a question of time. Linton and all, Timothy Linton, a very distinguished, argues we could be committed already to 33 feet. That would be West Atlantic ice sheet and then the contribution of Greenland. This is Ian Howitt. It's generally accepted. Don't take my word for it. It's take his word. It's generally accepted it's no longer a question of whether the West Atlantic ice sheet will melt. It's a question of when. We may see significant collapse of West Antarctica in our lifetimes. Okay, this is Linton, committed to potentially 33 feet, but what's really, really important, so people, one of the problems is you tell them the truth, and then they get overwhelmed by it. It's all over. No, it's not all over. Slow this down. Whether it's hundreds of years, a century, hundreds of years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years, makes a hell of a difference. All right, so these kind of, when you get 16 feet of sea level, you wipe out the area of current populations, inundate 850 million migrants you would have just from sea level rise. This is an even more important, even at 1.5 feet, if you take into account storm surges and you're destroying groundwater in island states because of porous underrock, so they don't have any fresh water. You're putting pressure on over 800 million people, and with just 1.5 feet. And we can have 1.5 feet, 2050. We can have 1.5 feet. So this migration, the big issue is when we talk about an existential risk, here's some more data. What do these ice sheets mean? Well, they mean the loss of some of the most important rice-producing regions in the world, Bangladesh and the Mekong Delta. Vietnam is the world's second largest rice exporter. They produce half the rice in Vietnam, the Mekong Delta does. So this now becomes a food crisis. All these things are interconnected in ways we don't realize. All right, I want to scoot ahead on the science. Darfur, climate refugees. At a 4 degrees Celsius warming, if we get to a 4 degrees Celsius warming, which if we have tipping points, I'll show you this is a hothouse Earth, 50%, roughly 50% of the land area and almost 3/4 of the world's population would be subjected to deadly heat. This is where you get existential risks. And you also get existential risk. By existential risk, I mean the deaths of hundreds of millions, billions of people, and then the collapse of civilization from instability and migration. The Institute for Economics and Peace, if natural disasters occur at the same rate seen in the last few decades, 1.2 billion people could be displaced globally by 2050. There's a large range. World Bank is 285 million. The Institute for Economics and Peace is a bigger number. But these are huge numbers. I've had conversations with people at the UNHCR, United Nations High Commission on Refugees, and there's not a chance in its current state that we could manage this. And I mean, the kind of unbelievable thing about all this is we're not even into the bad, and look what we're doing with governance. So I know this is kind of a brutal way, but it's just the whole point is to really be attentive to the truth. If you get a 4-foot sea level rise, which you could get in 2065, you could lead to potentially 1.4 billion migrants by 2060. So there's bigger numbers. This is the Cornell study. This is just a range. This is to show the risk. Lots of uncertainty here, but you're getting a sense of the risk. All these migrations create displacement. This creates conflict, the rise, the migrants out of Syria. This was contributed by one of the greatest in the 2,000 years, we think, the worst drought in the Fertile Crescent. So you had 5.6 million Syrians, about 1 million in Turkey, 1 million in Lebanon, 2 million, I think, finally in Europe. And now what do we have? The rise of the right-wing parties, Meloni in Italy's descendant of Mussolini, Brexit, the financial crisis played into this. But we seize the rise of the right, and what's the rise of the right in Europe about? It's about the migrants. So this is the tipping points issue. 9 tipping points are possible where we are now. And those tipping points, a tipping point is if I were to sit on this chair and I push this chair back, I get it to a certain point and I can manage it, and then all I do is a little bit more and it goes and it falls to a new state. Okay? That's the tipping point. And we're 9 of those major tipping points. And those transgressing those tipping points can push us into the hothouse Earth. The estimates at the Potsdam Institute, which is a great institute, is that they did modeling the carrying capacity of Earth at a 4 or 5 degrees Celsius world. A hothouse Earth is 1 billion people. That they think that's all that the Earth could carry at those levels. So now I'm going to close this up on that's giving you a sense of rapid climate change, and then we're talking about we're going to move into this question of abrupt climate change, which maybe people aren't aware of this. When I started doing this in 2007, I had read the abrupt climate change literature. I was kind of shocked that people weren't talking about it. There was lots of uncertainty. The National Academy of Sciences book was kind of terrifying because all that uncertainty. There's been 24 abrupt climate changes in the past 110,000 years. And the text says abrupt climate change are the norm, not the exception. So I kept thinking to myself, why the hell aren't we talking about this more? We're talking about this kind of gradual, which is now more rapid, change, but abrupt climate changes are the norm, not the exception. At that point, then IPCC argued that it was about 5 to 10% chance this century. Again, as long as it's pushed in the future, they think we don't take it as seriously. And now that's changed very, very significantly. This is Wally Broecker, arguably the greatest, certainly one of the most important climate scientists. His view is, I found convincing. To date, we have dealt with this problem as if its effects would come in the distant future, and so gradually that we could easily cope with them. This is certainly a possibility, but I believe there's an equal possibility that they will arrive suddenly and dramatically. So Broecker was a major figure in the recognition of abrupt climate change. As in the sciences, there's not just one hero or these kind of things. It's all the integration of everybody working together. But he was a particularly important figure. So that's that idea. That has been kind of my position. Why that it could go badly. It could go very badly. And on precautionary principle, you have to plan and think about it that this could go badly. You have to talk about it. You have to make people aware that in the background of what you see in the press and everything is this possibility that this could happen rapidly. This is the IPCC models on. So what does this mean? So the abrupt. I'm sorry, I didn't explain this very. So the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, or AMOC, is the most important heat distribution mechanism in the Atlantic Ocean. It takes warm waters from the tropics, pushes them north, then that water collapses and then comes down, descends in the ocean, and then takes cool water to the tropics. So it warms northern countries. This is why England has a mild climate with such a high latitude. And then it cools the tropics. And what happens is, as you dump, there's a host of mechanisms, but as you're Greenland's dumping fresh water into the North Atlantic, you start to shut down slow this mechanism, and it's a feedback so that a little bit of push, and then it can go quickly and shut down, all right? Or reduce so significantly that you have these huge impacts. This is the IPCC modeling this is the most recent one. The AMOC trigger mechanism, which is this freshening up of the North Atlantic water, in the high emission scenario. So this is what will happen at the end of the century. This is where we are now, at 1 degree Celsius. It's not. The simulations aren't picking it up, but we are picking it up in the observation. So in the past, since roughly, I would say things started to change in 2016 really, on abrupt climate change, and then since 2018, there's been all sorts of papers and about this. The most, give you an example of this, there's two mechanisms. The Heinrich event, 14,700 years ago, Greenland warmed 10 degrees Celsius in 3 years, with significant warming over the entire planet, along with the reconfiguration of global atmospheric circulation. If this happened today, we would all be threatened by that. Jorgen Stephenson, the lead author of that study, in an interview said, with the continued burning of fossil fuels, we're doing to the climate system what the investment bankers did to the economic system in the selling of subprime mortgages in 2006, 2007. There's been several studies. This one's in the process of being published. It's already been peer reviewed, and I'm just following what the scientists are saying, and this is what's considered kind of the best of the studies. There was one before this. The Ditlevsons argued that between 2025 and 2095, there was a 95% chance of the shutting down of the AMOC. This study is saying, trying to get higher resolution. The collapse time is estimated between 2037 and 2064, with a mean of 2050, and the probability of an AMOX collapse before the year 2050 is estimated to be 59% plus or minus 17%. So the range is 42 to 76% by 2050. Now, it's important, very important to realize, lots of uncertainty here. These aren't direct measurements. They're using different aspects of the system to make judgments about how fast this could collapse. But they sent a letter, 50 major scientists, many of these scientists disagree on some issues, to Arctic countries because basically it means the end of the Arctic countries, Norway, Sweden, etc. Now, we're going to take a little peek at this and then we're going to be finished with the science. What happens if there's two types, the Dansker-Oeschger events or the Heinrich events. What we're doing is a Heinrich event. In the Heinrich event of an AMOC collapse, you have what'll happen is this is your current monsoon kind of rain belt right now. And what you do is you drop that. Because what's happening is the heat that was pushing up is now stopped going up north, and it's then now collecting in the southern hemisphere, and then it pushes the rain systems south. So all across here, their rainy seasons diminish significantly, if not shut down. So that's hundreds of millions of people, closer to 1 billion people. Yeah. You can get a little better sense of this one. I put this slide in here to get a little sense, not only we could get a better sense here of the decrease in moisture of the Asian monsoon. So you can see that here. That's going to give you a better sense. So you're shutting down not just across Central and South America, but also the Asian monsoon. 85% of those who live in extreme poverty live in the tropics. It's a death sentence for these people. And people are going to move, the migrations. And again, I mean, it's bloody difficult to hear all this. Look at our governance in this situation. So this is what an AMOX, if you go to 3 degrees Celsius world, this is what an AMOX collapse looks like. You can have this heat's not being distributed northwards. You actually turn the Arctic countries into kind of an ice age. It could be 23 degrees Celsius colder in Bergen, Norway, if this shuts down. And so they sent a letter, scientists sent a letter to Arctic nations that your survival depends on this not happening. All your food production would shut down. And then, now I don't know enough with the science. I'm going to send some emails out to people to see if I can find out. But the real focus is on these Arctic countries. But I want to know, I don't know if this is just Eurocentrism, but all that heat's being collected in the tropics. It's not diminishing in the tropics. You were bringing cold temperatures to cool the tropics, and now you're just going to fry them. Then this heat, you get more heat down in the southern hemisphere, and what does that mean? That means that the West Atlantic ice sheet goes much quicker. And that's because it's largely being melted from underneath the ice. Okay. You get also very quickly, you'll get in the northeast of the United States, the models suggest up to 1 meter additional sea level rise. So that could happen very quickly, within 20 years or so. All right, so that's the risks. That's what we're talking about. And that becomes, I give these talks sometimes, and a friend of mine once said, you know, your talk shut down conversation. And so that really actually struck me, well, what's going on here? I'm trying to be very careful. I'm showing risks. I'm operating under procedural justice. People need to be informed of those risks. And showing a range. And the fact of the matter is, it's because it becomes overwhelming. So that becomes the problem. And then how do we think about it? Are we actually thinking about the problem? Much of what we talk about, I think sometimes that I find difficult when I hear ecological theology, is this kind of romanticism. If we just have a conversion towards the beauty of the earth, I mean, we're way beyond that. I mean, this is not a Francis moment, a St. Francis moment. It's a Dietrich Bonhoeffer moment. It's a much more serious engagement politically and in these existential risks. I'm not saying those aren't bad, but they're missing the key insight of the level of risk and how quickly we need to operate. So, what happens? This experience of overwhelm and the dynamics of existential risks. If you're not aware of the risks, you will not address them. So now I'm going to talk about what do we see in sociological literature, social psychology, about the experience of these existential risks. If you're not aware of the risks, you will not address them. Yet knowledge of these risks and the inadequate response to them can lead to feelings of powerlessness. And feelings of powerlessness can lead to hopelessness and angst. Kari Norgaard argues the person will work to avoid helplessness and angst by denying the truth. We'll run away from that. And we deny the truth in two ways. First, we just don't really talk about the problem. We talk about, we need this, and this is something that can happen decades down the line. We need a theology of aesthetics. No, who needs a theology of aesthetics? Not those poor people in the tropics. We deny the full implications of the evidence. We embrace a false optimism. Somehow technology will save us. We look on the bright side. Very typical thing in the United States. We're a can-do country. We can, you can't think big existential risks. That's impolite. That overwhelms people. The dismissal of the precautionary principle, that is to say, we don't actually take into effect that even if these are low probability, even if some of these are uncertain, we have to talk about and engage these to reduce the risks. We reduce the risk, the existential risk, to just another problem that we need to deal with. Health insurance, employment, saving the planet, this kind of thing. And then climate change, Norgaard has this provocative line. It is this quality of angst, a condition that social psychologists tell us we are profoundly motivated to avoid, that essentially makes climate change unthinkable. And so you shut down the conversation. The second path of denial. So the first path is we just don't really talk about the problem. We don't fully confront it intellectually. The second one is we do confront it. And we assent to the risks notionally. We accept the science, but then we functionally live in denial. We live as if the science is not true. And this living in denial, Robert J. Lufton, the great public psychiatrist that wrote The Nazi Doctors, well, one of the books he wrote was Inexcusable Weapons. And during the height of the Cold War, he asked the question, who's sane in this world? Who's sane in a world where at any moment you could die of nuclear war? And it's totally absurd, the whole thing. Mutually assured destruction. Who's sane? And he said those who are sane are not the people, those who are sane are the people who are the activists. The people who confront how just ridiculous this situation, how absurd this is at the level of risk. And they get involved in the anti-nukes movement, which is actually, all these years later, bared some fruit. They're the same people because they're integrated. They're completely, the full energy of the psyche. He's not doing philosophy or theology, he's doing psyche. The full energy of the person is engaged. Those who live in denial, those who just go about their life and live in denial, they're disintegrated. They leave a double life. And they spend huge amounts of psychic energy pushing the terror away. This is Norgaard's book, Cognitive Dissonance. She did some qualitative studies. Cognitive dissonance refers to a situation involving conflicting attitudes, beliefs, or behaviors. This produces a feeling of discomfort, leading to an alteration in one's attitudes, beliefs, or behaviors to reduce the discomfort and restore balance. We want to get to psychological equilibrium. And doing that, we live a double life. And this, I think, is relevant for some reflections we can have on Lonergan. Norms of conversation, emotion, attention assist people in keeping troubling emotions at bay and simultaneously produce a double reality. There is a mutually, this is my kind of interpretation of hers, there is a mutually reinforcing dynamic between the desire not to talk about truths, conversation, that make one feel guilty, fearful, and helpless, emotions, and the socially accepted norms not to talk about truths that make others feel guilty, fearful, and helpless. In this state of individual and social avoidance, one will either avoid these truths or not pay attention to them, be attentive, so we shut that down. When they cross one's awareness, as such, one will live in denial. Looking at my time here. This is an interesting study of, well, I'll move on from this. Living in denial, this is a particularly powerful lines of Vaclav Havel. Living in denial, we put pressure on other people to live in denial. Those who live within the lie confirm the system. He's talking about his time under Soviet rule. Those who live within the lie confirm the system, fulfill the system, make the system, and are the system. As one person do it, they put pressure on the others. That's scandal. I'm actually putting pressure on you to live in denial, to live a double life, an inauthentic life. So what is the dynamic of existential risk? The vicious feedback loop. If you are unaware of existential threats, you will not address them. Yet knowledge of existential threats and the inadequate response to them can lead to powerlessness. Powerlessness leads to hopelessness, and hopelessness leads to lived denial. Living in denial is a dehumanizing, disintegrated double life that leads to political apathy and disengagement. The existential threat is not addressed. The risk remains, and the person and society are psychologically, morally, and existentially diminished. The threat increases and becomes more overwhelming for consciousness, which leads to feelings of powerlessness, hopelessness, and the vicious feedback loop starts again as the threat increases. There's often been this idea, well, when it gets really bad, people will tune in. Look how people believe Trump. Things are bad, you believe this person tells you lie after lie, and you believe it. You operate, you can very easily just move into fantasy. So, what's the way out of this? The way out of this is to be aware of this dynamic. First, the education in the threat, the level of threat, to be aware of what I've just talked about, this dynamic within us individually and society. The second, education regarding the possibilities to reduce the threat. That is the technological possibilities. We've had the possibility since at least 2005 of getting 80% of our energy from renewable sources, if we really scaled it up. The economics. The economics are that back in 2005 as well, it would cost us very little to do this, and that we're having hundreds of billion dollars of damage all over the world, trillions of dollars now over decades, that the economics make sense. Socially, I need to also realize that most people, if you look at Krosnick's polling at Stanford in the United States, was particularly bad on denial. Overwhelmingly, even red states, 75% plus of people want to deal with this. They recognize it's a threat. They want to deal with it. One of the studies I probably should have mentioned was Nina Ilyasov. She says she did a qualitative study. When she deals with people individually, she was dealing with all these civic groups. She asks them questions what they care about. When she deals with them individually, they care about huge issues: global poverty, global nuclear war, global environmental crisis. When she brings them together in their civic group, except for the hardcore activists in their civic group, they talk about small things close to home. My kids, my neighborhood, my school system. Can't talk about things. So we created a system that alienates us against our deepest concerns. And I do this exercise with my students. And it's important, I think, is that I ask them, so how many pay attention to the news? Okay, and whatever, 6 out of 20. The news, how many pay attention to the genocide in Gaza? 6. How many are troubled by it? 6. Then I ask them, why? You won't know these people. They're all clear across the world. What is in you? What is it? What's the condition of the possibility of you caring? And I would say that we discover our solidarity. These people are me and they are you. And what's the grounds for that? The grounds for that is that our intentionality, our openness to all that's true and good. The unrestricted desire in Lonergan and Ronner, and the unrestricted desire to the good. And the more that we diminish our concern for that, so people privately care about this, but they can't talk about it publicly, we alienate people from their deepest desires. We alienate them from themselves because the self is in relationship. And what's the extent of that relationship? That relationship is to all things. In the theological section of this, which I'm not going to probably be able to get to, but maybe doing question and answer, I would argue that if we look at the perfection of the human being, so if we do kind of a metaphysical, theological analysis of what the perfection of the human being is, union with God. Union with God, we participate in God's knowledge, and the extent of our relationality is to all things. So in our perfection, we are profound, we're related to all things, and we receive the good that God gives us and give to others. So there's a mutual interpenetration, relationality between all things flowing from God. And we get a sense of that grace. Grace is this, I'll use a Ronerian, I think this is in Lonergan as well, but people can correct me. Ronner's position is grace is the self-communication of God. And the vision, so grace is in continuity with vision. What is vision? It's about union with God and God's self. The self-communication of God in history is God, the infinite. The full communication is in the vision. So there's continuity there. And so the experience of my being wounded, your being wounded, my students being wounded, by seeing the horrors of Gaza is already a recognition of the presence of grace. It's the condition of the possibility. Freud was wrong. Christianity is not an escape. Christianity is you're going to assume within yourself a great deal more suffering, because grace extends your relationality, and the depth of the goodness of the human being is now understood at grace as you begin to take on God's eyes and knowing things in a very limited way, right? As a human being, God is infinite, as I remind myself all the time. The difference between God and the universe is God. And so when we turn away from this suffering and this overwhelm, we diminish ourselves. You could argue that that's actually a turning away from God's presence, moving us to truth and goodness, which is sin. And then the implications of that, again, are enormous for the future generations, etc. So one of the ways I want to, kind of the theological moment in all this, and then I'll open up for question and answer, is that I think that if we look at, looking at Lonergan's work, the absolutely supernatural solution, that is in the presence of this overwhelm, that we really, I like John of the Cross very much, we are presented with our commitment to truth is going to put us in a very difficult position. So in John of the Cross, there is the dark night of the senses and the dark night of the spirit. That is, you move beyond. God is pulling you beyond the satisfactions, the sensual satisfactions, and even the intellectual satisfactions. God is beyond all that. God is more than all that. And one of the dangers, I think, is that in our intellectual lives, there is the good of it. That is that we experience the good of having insights and understanding and that process. But then we can be fixated on that and miss the reality. And that reality that we have to really engage creatively to deal with, how do we get our institutions, how do we organize, how do we engage this? That reality puts us into a very overwhelming situation where the experience of coming to the truth is very, is a dark night in some way. It's a process by which our commitment to the truth is going to move us through these dark nights of the senses and the spirit. It's roughly moving beyond all your attachments to things, that you're not doing things because of this particular good. You're operating out of God's presence within you. And that means to do that, you have to drop your attachments to the pleasures of these things. And I think that is a path forward for engaging that theology can open up to people. And then we, in university setting, I mean, we are people who have the training and the capacities to really to allow this negativity within ourselves. Pretty damn difficult to ask the students to do this. One of the things that drives me crazy is, well, I have hope because the students will take care of it. Screw that. We destroy their governance. We destroy their climate system. We need to take care of that. On that happy note, I'll open up for questions.
I have about 12 minutes for Q&A. Richard, you're welcome to manage your own Q&A.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your talk. And something that struck me is how you located sanity in activist movements. And that's really where I find sanity in this moment. It's just like being at the Catholic Worker, being with people who are trying to live this integrated life that you described. And then I want to connect that to something you briefly raised, that you said, this is not a Francis moment, it's a Bonhoeffer moment, right? And I wonder, and of course you're referring to St. Francis of
Yeah,
Assisi.
St. Francis of Assisi, yeah.
I wonder if it's a moment for both. I wonder if it's a moment for a synthesis of the contemplative and the prophetic. I'm thinking of Dorothy Day and her profound attentiveness and love of the beauty of the world, as well as her work of resistance, this prophetic no, or Merton, right? And so many figures who sort of weave together the contemplative with the prophetic.
Okay, great.
I want to throw that out there to you, but then also I want to ask you, if this is a Bonhoeffer moment, what kinds of tactics are we personally called into?
Yeah.
Resist this fascist system of domination that we find ourselves in that is literally destroying this planet.
Yeah, and us. Yeah, so, yeah, that's great. So my basic argument would be that actually the key ground, probing the ultimate foundation of living authentically, is contemplation. That would be John of the Cross. My concern is that I'm Augustinian in this. Anything finite can lead you towards God, or anything finite can lead you away from God. The intellectual life can lead you away from God in its pleasures. There is intellectual concupiscence. There's a way in which I think often there's this sense that you have to discover the beauty of you have to have your ecological conversion, has to discover the beauty, and then if we discover the beauty of the world, then that's the key moment.
Sure.
And there's over and over the action platform even the Pope has. I mean, for I think you have to do what we know that's worked, and what we know that's worked is nonviolent civil resistance, which is a Gene Sharp's 3 volumes are 1,000 pages. This is not just people going out and getting mad, and it's a struggle, and it's a very intelligent art by which you manage power structures. So, in my judgment, Catholic universities should take use as an analogy the Jesuits in El Salvador, UCA. That should be the social projection, and it's now in the Jesuit documents. It's been there, I think 2012, those documents, social projection could be there. The first is that I actually think it's not necessary contemplation, but I think I have to drop my attachment to wanting to experience my engagement as something satisfying. I have to be able to be in a position where I can spend my life and I lose. I was trying to think, Daniel Ellsberg's kind of a hero of mine. And I was thinking of Ellsberg because Ellsberg went to his death as a non-believer. He didn't believe in God. What was the grounds of I asked his son, Bob Ellsberg, what was the grounds of his conviction? And Ellsberg is having Robert, his son, they're copying the Pentagon Papers. Ellsberg knows he'll probably spend the rest of his life in jail. He's got 4 kids. Yeah. He tells his son, I asked him, and I heard him say this before, I said, what was the ground of doing this? He said, well, he thought anybody in his position would do that. Well, no, people don't do that. You did it. Now, looking at it, so I was trying to look at, so I don't want to just deal with contemplation, because if you look at most of the activists, they're not contemplatives. But at least the ones if you look at look at the states in the United States that are green and the people engaging, they're social justice warriors. They're largely not contemplatives. But so how would you articulate what's going on with there? So I want to do something not simply just contemplation, moving into religious, but how do you get the person? What is this phenomenology of an absolute claim? And I would talk more about that, but I took all my time overwhelming you. But what is the phenomenology of an absolute claim? The thing about Ellsberg Ellsberg did that he was kind of an example I was using, but I was just thinking more about it. Ellsberg was pretty clear that if he did this, it would be effective. If he presented the corruption, it would be. If he got this out, it would be effective in ending the war. Whereas you and I, if we dedicate our lives to this, the odds are very much against it. So how do you dedicate your life to something where you lose? And so that requires an absolute commitment. So that requires a reconfiguring of your life. In Lonergan, the higher integration is if the full movement of my being is towards the infinite good, and that's what I want, is possession of infinite truth and goodness, God. And if I'm engaging within the finite world and I treat it as absolute, this is why I think the ascetic, the contemplative becomes important, then I'm going to move very quickly away from anything that's going to be this level of self-sacrifice. In the contemplative life, it's God that's operating. John of the Cross is very clear. Your activity, now you have to get grace and nature clear here, is 1 hour of God's activity is more transformative than a lifetime of yours. And that the self has to have a sense in which God is giving to the self. They are achieving their end through contemplation and their commitment, because they're absolutely saying yes to the truth. And then that allows them to give themselves to overflow from that union with God, to overflow into their activities, to give themselves in what's a cause that's very difficult, the level of engagement. Did I answer with, I talked a long time, but I'm not sure I answered what you said.
That was beautiful. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, so what can we do? So the other issues are, so for instance, I'm involved with the International Center for Nonviolent Conflict, and I and been in conversation with Ivan Marovich. He was involved, one of the students who were involved in the Otpor uprising that brought down Slobodan Milosevic. He was one of the original students. And he's a trainer here, and so I'm kind of advising them on climate, because they didn't do climate, it's a longer story. But I really pressed that I thought the student uprisings, 200 universities, if you look at what went on in those uprisings with regards to Gaza, there were so much lies about what the students were up to. They were up to the right thing. If you really find out, listen to professors and listen to students, they were doing it right. They made mistakes. But to those student protests, if those could transition, if you listen to many of those students, it's not just about Gaza. It's the domination, the system that's destroying everything.
Yeah.
So I thought that was very hopeful. I actually think now, with the unfolding coup, if we can save the republic, if we get enough people, if you can save this republic. And I'm trying to engage this now, and when this is over, I'm going to engage Marovich on this, is if you can get people involved in training in nonviolent civil resistance, you can go from saving this republic to pivoting to. And you don't need everybody. So the study shows you only need about 3.5% of the population in the 20th century to overcome brutal dictatorships. In the United States, as a 2014 Yale study, 13% of Americans were willing to engage in nonviolent civil disobedience against governments and institutions that made climate change worse. So it's there, but it needs to be. And our universities need to.
Yes.
I think we may have time for one more question.
Probably not one more answer the way I answered. Yes.
Thank you so much. This is very helpful. I heard an MD say once, pain in mammals produces aggression. And which, when I hit my head on the corner of the cabinets in my kitchen, I'm able to repeat that experiment. I wonder about the sort of embodiment of opening ourselves up to this kind of negativity, to use a sort of banal term, and the sort of management. You talk about working in terms of nonviolent conflict. If we open ourselves up to this and we feel all the uncomfortable emotions, I think that there's a kind of biological bent towards aggression, and I'm curious if you've thought about how that gets managed in terms of not letting the conflict over trying to solve the problem itself generate a new problem.
Yeah. So this is a real danger. I mean, one of the things that I've said to my students for 10 years, and I say to people, you're going to be involved in nonviolent civil resistance. And the earlier you do it, the more we can do it effectively. Because people are going to, if not, people will go violent. And if you go violent, then the spiral is horrible. And if you look at, there are uprisings, violent uprisings that do work, but if you look at Erica Chenoweth and others, that what nonviolence is more effective. And it's fairly simple, right? So what do you need to do? The power structures depend. All power structures depend upon the obedience of their subjects, Gene Sharp. If you have enough people pulling away from the system, that is pulling away the pillars of support for the power structure, it collapses. So, and what do you need? Well, the kind of litmus test is when you have grandmothers and mothers with their children on the streets, it's over. Egypt, 18 days. And then you got to analyze. So, for instance, Egypt, you got to analyze particular situations. So this requires real thinking, right? This is real serious thinking. So, for instance, I was at a conference and a very distinguished ethicist. The whole talk was about how the primacy of the communal over the individual. And I left that thinking, you just started. The real start is, okay, now we need to do organizing and we need to find out a community. And then the process is a very sophisticated process by which you analyze power. So what are the power structures in a particular organization? Well, anyway, if you pull those power structures down, it'll collapse. And Egypt is the example, for instance. What is Egypt's weakness? Egypt was that everybody had to be in the military. Once you got past the Secret Service, what do you have? You have the military comes in, And getting past the secret police, and it was hundreds of, maybe thousands of young people died. Once you got past them, they bring in the military, and are these people, they're going to shoot their cousins? Once the military's brought in, these people are just, they're doing their duties because they have to do it. They're not going to mow down their cousins for Hosni Mubarak, and it was over. Once the military came, everybody's scared. Oh my God, the military's came, the cannons, and what happened? They're talking, it's their cousins, they're talking, it's family. It's over. So you have to identify. Now that worked in that situation. What works in our situation? And that you know, that a lot of academic work can be done. That. What are power structures? How does this work? What is? And I don't understand. I don't think we can hold on to our integrity as universities. You know, I gave a talk with the president of my university, and I said, we are the system. We are the lie. Last talk I gave to the president. But I only get one, so you might as well tell them what you think. But, and I think, yeah, anyway, there's much more to say. But yeah, thank you all for your attention.